what we're going to cover today is what types of issues are common in the lending arena, how to spot potential problems, how to avoid those lending pitfalls, and what you can do if you've fallen into the pitfalls. You've got a deal that's not that's fallen apart. So please know and understand that all lenders who service for Fannie and Freddie must follow the agency guidelines. And the guidelines are very black and white. However, sometimes lender interpretation of what they're seeing in black and white is different. Just like if you were to order a title commitment at one title company and you run into some title issues, it does not necessarily mean the deal can't be done. It just might mean that you're going to have to talk to a different title company to see if they would insure the title. Same thing with the lenders. We're all bound to the same agency guidelines, but there is sometimes some flexibility. So just because you run into a problem with one lender doesn't mean that you shouldn't pick up the phone, run the scenario by another lender and see if there's any way you can get that deal back on track. We have I told you guys just a little bit ago, about 25% of our business is deals that someone thought they were getting a better deal somewhere else, and they went with it, and then the deal falls apart at the last minute. Seller has to agree to extend for you guys to be able to put the deal back together and get it closed on time, or with a small extension, but still it can be done. So what we're going to go over today is just some of those gray areas and things to be looking for. So just like we talked about a while ago, credit scores do determine a lot of program eligibility. I mean, it's weighed heavily on credit scores. So what do you need to know about credit scores? Well, if someone comes to us today and we get them pre-approved, we go through the whole process. We spend the $500 that it takes for us to get someone pre-approved. We spend the 5 or 6 hours that it takes for us to get somebody pre-approved. And then it takes them 3 months to find the house. And our credit report is not going to be good long enough for us to fund the transaction. We're going to have to pull a new credit report. If that credit score changes, then that could change the transaction. So what do you need to know? Again, just like we were talking about on those pre-approval questions. If you're looking at a pre-approval letter, you know that you've been working with someone for a long time. Some of the pitfalls that you could avoid by just asking the questions, making sure the lender has a credit report that is going to be good through the entire transaction, through closing and funding. If it's close to being expired before you close and fund, then the lender really needs to pull a new credit report now, so that we know that we're going to still be okay all the way through. Because I can't tell you how many times people will get excited about buying a house and go buy a car before they buy the house. Or a whole house full of furniture. Yes. What we're seeing more than that right now is people are charging up credit cards because it's the only way they can afford living. Say their daughter's got a dance recital and the costume's another $200 for all the costumes for the dance. And their water heater just went out. Or their cars need tires on them. What do? A lot of times they're turned into credit cards. If they charge up a credit card and they bump to that next tier. So maybe that their credit card was 10% of their credit limit, and then they charge on it, and now they're at a 20%. Their score is going to go down. Well, what if their score goes down about the time that you have to re-pull a new credit report? And we're seeing that right now just because credit card balances are at a national high. Credit card delinquencies are at a national high. And so if we had someone the other day, sad scenario. Their credit score went from the mid-6s to the 500s after they went on under contract. Their credit, they go on contract. We re-pull a new credit report because it was going to expire before we closed and funded. They missed a credit card payment by 1 day. They got to terminate. And there is no repair for a late credit card payment. There's no quick, hurry up and fix this. It's in their history. So, yeah.
So if they do get excited and they go out and they buy a vehicle, is there any fix for that if they make a major purchase?
They need to buy a house really fast before the credit report expires. If someone comes to me, and Brandy and I can tell you some stories. I'll share the one that you and I are thinking after this one. If someone comes to us and said, or if you guys call, if Beverly calls me and says, hey, you know, I just noticed they have a brand new vehicle. They just pulled up. We're doing the inspections. They're in a brand new vehicle. Black tag still on it. Or the new tip tag. All right. Get a copy of their paperwork because I got to add it to their debt to income and see if they still qualify with the new payment. If they still qualify for the new payment, I'm going to look at the date on the credit report. I'm going to see if I have to have a new credit report before we close and fund. If we don't, then I'm just going to add the debt to the credit report, add the debt to the application, liability and payment, and we'll be fine. If they don't close and fund before I got to pull a new credit report, I got a problem. So if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and pull a new credit report after that debt reports, which is going to sometimes take a couple of weeks to make sure the scores are still okay. So it depends on what part of the process they're in and how quickly they're closing. So you better call us right away as soon as you notice that.
So you pull a report at football, and then you pull it. When is the time to pull reports?
We won't pull it. If we pull a report, we won't do pre-quals. I will never ever issue a pre-qualification letter.
Okay.
Because it's, yeah, pre-approval only. We will spend the time, we will spend the money. You missed it on the class. It costs us about $500 minimum to do a pre-approval. And it takes us about 5 to 6 hours. So because I'm not half-assing that. Your reputation's on the line, my reputation's on the line, and time's wasted you guys showing houses so I won't do it unless we do it all the way. So we get a pre-approval letter. That credit report, whatever the expiration is, we're not going to pull again unless we have to. We're going to hope that that letter will take us through expiration. If it doesn't, then we'll pull it as soon as we know that we have a close date so that our credit report doesn't expire again.
I've been telling my people long, which is a good thing probably, but I always just say, look, from now until then, you don't do anything different because they will pull the report in.
Yeah.
Right before close.
Well, that's how
We're going to do well, good, because we will be providing, pulling a soft pull.
credit, but if there is any extra there, then
Yeah, a soft pull will be done within 3 days of closing. And if there's any significant changes, and there's very little variance, if there's any changes, we have to pull a new report. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you're right, we will pull again from that standpoint. Yeah.
So 3 days closing.
We have to pull another one. We have to re-verify income, we have to re-verify assets, and we have to re-verify credits prior to the closing, right at the very end. Huh? Absolutely. Employment, you'd be surprised how many people are no longer on their job because they thought that once they're pre-approved, it didn't matter. They'll change. Yep. Now there's a couple of other things that we're going to be looking for on that credit report that's a little bit more than just the credit score. So we're looking at the credit history, we're looking at the debts, we're looking at the age of the credit. We're looking at the date of last activity, because sometimes things will stop reporting. Well, we got to ask why. Did it stop reporting because they filed bankruptcy and we're not seeing the bankruptcy because it's no longer being reported? Why is it? Or was it a short sell and so they stopped reporting? Or is it a foreclosure and they stopped reporting? So, or is it a voluntary repossession? Like, we have to look at the date of last activity, make sure that everything is current. So we're looking at the age, when it opened, and the date of last activity. The other thing that's super important is disputes. We have to pay attention to disputes. Years and years ago, and when I say years and years ago, I'm thinking like 10, 15 years ago, when credit repair was really new, the way people would do credit repair is just dispute everything on the credit report. When you dispute something on a credit report, that information is no longer looked at, and that information is no longer factored in the credit score, because it gives the consumer an opportunity to prove that the information is not correct. The burden of proof is on the consumer. The burden of proof for the creditor is to prove that the information, no, they don't even have to prove anything. The creditor doesn't have to prove anything. The consumer has to prove the information is incorrect. And if it's incorrect, the creditor has to remove it. It's a long process, but there is a start and an end as long as you follow the law, which changes. So a lot of people will go now and pull their credit report and just dispute things on their credit report. And when they do that, we now have a false credit score. We can't make a lending decision based on a false credit score. So people will tell us all the time, I'm working on my credit. You need to ask the question, does your lender know what you're doing to work on your credit? Because they could be just going in there and disputing everything. If there's accounts in dispute, FHA lending guidelines require that they remove the dispute. It has to get out of dispute. And we got to know what information is correct. Did it get removed? Did it get revised? Or is the information still as stands as it was reported originally? A lot of times these creditors know it. These creditors can be real assholes. And they'll go, oh, you're buying a house, huh? And you need this removed and out of dispute. You owe us money. When you pay us, we'll remove it out of dispute. And so now the money that they saved up to buy a house is being used to get accounts out of dispute. But we can't move forward until that day that happens. Conventional guidelines require most of the time the accounts be out of dispute. VA is the only one that's flexible with disputed accounts. That's a big deal, because if someone doesn't like their credit score, someone doesn't like their interest rate, you guys, interest rates just recently changed, and there's a bunch of back and forth about whether or not and how much they are going to charge the buyers for all of these risks. So the risk being debt to income, the risk being their whole level of risk. So what you guys think is a reasonable interest rate may like a high interest rate is because you don't know what we know. And if someone's getting quoted a really low rate compared to what our rate is, it's because we're looking at all of that information and someone else is just quoting them a BS rate off of if everything was perfect rate. So if anything on the credit changes, if debt to income changes, it's going to change everything on that loan. If the interest rate changes, the debt to income changes even greater. It also changes the mortgage insurance rate in which they're paying. And it's all tied to credit, credit history, and credit scores. So from the time that someone starts shopping until the time they find a house, all of that information could change. The problem is a lot of your buyers, once they start shopping, then they start shopping interest rates and pricing and all of that. Well, number one, that changes daily and throughout the day. So nobody can accurately shop interest rates unless they're all being quoted based on all of their information and the exact same date and time. Otherwise, shopping is just a waste of their time because that information changes that quickly. So, I say all that because what does it matter to you in a transaction? Well, it could change the deal because all of this could change the loan approval that we have to constantly be updating based on this information. So communication with you guys and communication with the customer is really important. So if you feel that they're frustrated, if you hear that, no, I hadn't talked to them, every time I talk to them, that's something new or whatever, it's because number one, it's changing for us that quickly. Number two, them ghosting us and keeping that information from us could bite everybody in the butt later because it's all going to come out eventually. So them having those conversations, if someone called me today and cussed me out and said, I am so frustrated, this is such a hard process, I don't even want to buy a house, but I have to buy a house because the landlord's kicking me out, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. Give me your frustration. Tell me what's on your mind. Tell me what is got you upset so we can work through that. What's hard for us is when they won't even return our phone calls because they're frustrated. So tell them, listen, whatever your frustrations are, please have a conversation with your loan officer, have a conversation with the mortgage company and tell them what's on your mind so they can explain why all of this matters.
Personally, I hate to receive a pre-proof letter, so-called, from somebody I've never heard of or something.
Well, because you've been, yeah, Beverly's saying it makes her nervous. I'm paraphrasing. Makes her nervous when she sees a pre-approval letter from someone she's not familiar with, because communication is so important. We're all in this together. How long do you wait before you borrow it? You can borrow again. This is something, again, we talked about it in the last class. There's a lot of public information that no longer shows on credit reports. And so I have this chart and I can send this chart to you by itself. In fact, well, it's going to be in the packet that I'm going to send, but I can send you a flyer specifically for this. Brandy, let's just send the flyer with the recap. I would highly recommend that you take a picture of this and save it on your phone. Some people were really, they think that because they had a foreclosure 4 years ago, they don't qualify to buy a house. And they do. There's some people that fell on hard times 2 years ago and lost. Maybe they lost. I mean, we didn't see that many foreclosures through COVID, but there was some, people went through some hard times. And so I don't want people disqualifying themselves based on assumption. So you guys could have this chart on hand that you can keep handy for those for those questions. But those are some of the things that public records doesn't necessarily find, that we're going to look on Fraud Guard to pull up any of the seasoning requirement triggers that are listed on this chart. Now, we're all going to run our loans through. Every lender has to have, for the loan to be insured, it has to be ran through one of the automated underwriting systems. The system's only as smart as the information. And I say that because we just went over all the different income calculations and how in-depth those calculations have to be. If Kim was, let's see, well, you sold rail side, but we'll just use that as an example. If Kim tells me that I was making, rail side's making $500,000 a year. And so I do everything based on just looking at this $500,000 a year, even the tax returns. I just have the first page of the tax return and I'm going off the 1040 where it shows that she made $500,000. And I didn't ask questions and I didn't get all of the background information. I put it in the system that she made $43,000, $43,333 a month. I think that's comes out to $500,000 a year. So that's what her income is. And I run it through the AUS and the AUS says, yeah, sure, party on. You can go buy her a $3 million house. And I don't get the rest of the documentation. She goes and finds a house and then I ask for the rest of the documentation. And I find out that, yes, that's how much Railside made. That's how much she made from Railside, but it's because she sold the business. And I didn't ask for the backup tax returns to see what the income really was based on operating as a business for the last 2 years. Is the AUS right? I mean, it was based on the information put into the system. So basically it did its job, but we didn't do our job by asking the questions and getting the documentation that we need. So AUS, yes, and then it also, there's information that it doesn't see that we still have to pull out the guidelines for. So just because someone has an AUS in the file doesn't mean that it's going to close and fund. So some of the common pitfalls that we have talked about in the previous class, but even in bigger detail here is we had someone the other day, they came to my office. He was a truck driver as 1099. No, he was a truck driver W-2 for the last year and a half. Now, truck drivers can be paid by mileage. They can be paid by load. They can be paid hourly. They could be paid, God, what are the other different ways? It's never weight. Yeah, mileage, load, hourly. They could own their truck. They could lease their truck. The company could own their truck. They could be W-2'd. They could be 1099. Like truck drivers, like a bazillion different ways of being paid. And so we have to have the break. We have to have the history. We have to have the breakdown. So if someone worked for different trucking companies in the 2-year period of time, we got to know how he was paid at each one of those trucking companies. Again, it's going to require paperwork, right? This particular guy was W-2 for the trucking company he works for now, but he opted to go 1099. Oh, and sometimes they get per diem for overnight stays. So he made more money going 1099, not just because, you know, he wouldn't withheld taxes, but the employer paid him more because it was a lot less work on them from a payroll standpoint. In that particular case, he'd been 1099 long enough that I'm going to go ahead and do a credit scenario and see if I can't use his new tax return showing his 1099 income and average it with the W-2 with the exceptions and all kind of stuff. My point to all that is that just because it may or may not fall in these charts, those are agency guidelines. I have black and white guidelines, but there's always the gray area where we as lenders make underwriting, or the underwriter has discretion to make decisions based on the specific scenarios. So these are some of the things that we're going to be looking for, but not, that could be a pitfall. If you run into any of these scenarios and it becomes a problem with one lender, don't just give, I'll just say, this is a CE class, and I should give someone you trust a call and run the scenario by them and let them run it through an underwriter. As a CE class, I can't tell you, call me, or call Brandy. But just like if you run into a title issue, you need to talk to another title company and see if they can get around the issue. If you run into a lending issue, you need to run it by another lender and see if they can get around that issue. Some of the collateral pitfalls that you guys might run into. And this runs into, just like the example I just gave on the appraisal. An appraiser might call for a vapor barrier underneath the house on a pyramid home. We don't do vapor barriers around here. With proper ventilation, it's not necessary. Now, if you've got a house sitting, 6 inches off the ground, there's no systems underneath the ground, everything's run above the ground or in the house for some reason, which I would think would be a marketability issue, but whatever. And there's not good ventilation, then maybe a vapor barrier would make sense. And maybe it's cheaper to do a vapor barrier than it is to raise the house and do it the right way. I mean, I can't imagine anybody doing that, but that could be a collateral pitfall. And if you run into that scenario, you need to ask questions. Some of the other areas that in this area, for example, ag exemption. If you're showing a property or you've got a buyer buying, you've listed a property with ag exemption, or you've got a buyer looking at buying a property with ag exemption. That ag exemption does not transfer to a new buyer. The new buyer has to apply for the ag exemption. And there is an approval process. A lender is taking a risk by figuring debt to income and doing escrow analysis calculations based on ag exemption, because there's no guarantee the appraisal district's going to grant the ag exemption. That could be a problem. It's a collateral pitfall that you could fall into if you don't address that up front. Guest house on the property. Ask questions. If you've got 2 houses on one property, like we talked about last week, and it's got a separate driveway, a separate address, a separate electric meter, but it's one parcel, it could be a problem. That could be a pitfall, and you need to ask questions up front. If you have improvements made to the property, check and make sure that every improvement has been permitted. Because if it hasn't, it could be a pitfall. Pools with USDA. If you're looking at a USDA contract and you know you've got a shop on that property and there's a swimming pool, will USDA allow the appraiser to give value to the shop and the pool? No. No value is given to the shop and the pool. So if you accepted a USDA contract and you didn't know that, that could be a pitfall. We're all professionals. We need to know these things because at the end of the day, it's your job and my job to make sure that the check is good at closing. And all of these things could prevent that from happening. If you've got a barn and there's a business being operated out of the barn, a lot of people during COVID, mechanic shops are all operated, or not all operated, but could be operated out of the barn. Is there oil storage on the property from this mechanic shop? Is it advertised as commercial from the street? Those could all be problems that would be pitfalls on a transaction. So pay attention. Manufactured homes. If you're listing a home or you are selling a home, you're representing the buyer. You need to make sure that you know whether or not the property has ever been moved. Is that its original location or was it used and moved on site? Because that could be a pitfall on a transaction. We talked about assets a little bit ago. For those of you guys who weren't in that class, you do need to know where the money is coming from at closing. If you know mom and dad showed up to go look at that property and mom and dad's talking about helping the kids buy the house, could be some documentation that's needed. If it's FHA, mom and dad are going to have to provide a bank statement. Mom and dad don't like providing bank statements, so have that conversation early, not later. Yeah. Let us know. We don't see the insufficient funds so much anymore because we try to do the account check. But the unsecured funds, we do have people selling their side-by-sides or their, just pop up, or their campers, their RVs. There's documentation that's going to be required. Don't wait till the last minute. If you know that that's happening, be sure you tell them to contact their lender or shoot us an email. Shoot the lender an email and say, hey, put them on there. Hey, we were just having a conversation. They're selling an RV as part of their funds for the down payment. Would you please let them know what paperwork they're going to need for that? Because if you hear about it, let us know about it so that we can coach them through that. I mean, chances are we've already had that conversation with them, but it's better to have it twice than not at all. So, I know I fixed
I
that.
had a situation years ago. We should close the closing. Some person was not.
It's your phone.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sold his motorcycle.
Mhm.
Found out after closing,
He didn't own the motorcycle. Yeah. Well, there's some of the Beverly had a transaction.
Bring that.
Hey, mute yourself, Ben. We're done. If you want to hop off, you'll still get your credit. There's a lot of these vehicles or recreational vehicles, they don't even have the titles anymore. They've been changing hands without the titles. And if we can't prove that they own the asset, we can't give them credit for selling the asset and using those funds. So, yeah. Whenever they were asking for paperwork to finalize the transaction. Does anybody on the Zoom call have any scenarios or questions that they want to add in regards to what could kill the deal? Or something that you've come across or that you might be coming across soon? Kelly, have you had anything funky yet?
That's-
You've been selling for a couple years now. Danny, I know all your deals have been easy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well,
You did a good job covering everything. Thank you.
yeah, I'm just trying to think of, so one scenario I was going to share with you guys, we got really lucky. I love our community. We all work so well together and helping each other out when we get in jams. But Brandy had one scenario a couple of years ago where her customer, it made sense because Ford was offering some exceptional financing. And he had more of a fleet of vehicles for his business. And so it made sense for him to buy this new Ford truck. Financially, it made sense. His payment was less. He got better financing terms. It was a newer vehicle. And so he didn't think anything of it because his payment was going down. There was a problem. And even after he bought the new truck, Bob Utter Ford, amazing group of people, undid the deal, which is a big deal. I come from a car dealership background, and I know how hard it is to unwind a deal. But they unwound that deal for him and then held that truck until we were done with our transaction after he had purchased it. Had they not been cooperative, we could not have done the loan. And it was a one-of-a-kind home. It was not something he could just go find and rebuy.
Problem was too that he had the truck that he had.
Hey, Michelle.
So his company- Well, when he traded
Oh,
it,
that's right.
He put it in his personal name.
That's,
So,
yeah, that's right.
having that debt, and because
Hey,
of
Michelle.
Yeah.
that now,
One thing that we've kind of got to be aware of around the lake out there is different communities such as VFW, American Legion, things
Oh,
like that, and all of their requirements
yes.
of the buyers.
Yes. So if you guys are showing property out at the lake, if it's got good lake access and it's not $1 million property, it is likely a leasehold property. And it will not qualify for a mortgage loan. So they're going to need more money down. The guidelines are going to be tougher and bank rates right now are at 9%. So 8 3/4 to 9% easily. So figure out their financing first because they're going to get excited about what they can buy for their money, but not have the money to buy it. HOAs, Danny, I'm so glad you said that because also HOAs, when you guys are showing a property and it is in an HOA and we have more and more, or PUDs or MUDs, we as a lender need to know that. Because if we're figuring debt to income and these people are maxed out, we're at a 48, 49% debt to income on a $200,000 house. And you guys say, I mean, well, they're not going to be at a HOA for that, but $425,000 house. And you find the house that they totally are in love with and it's $450,000. We're already at a 48 and you're asking us to bump up and try to get an approval. And then you forget to tell us it's in a MUD, and now we got to add another $75 a month to pay in their debt to income, and they no longer qualify. We need to know those HOAs, MUDs, and PUDs up front. Plus, we need to know what the transfer fees are going to be because that's going to affect how much assets they have, how much they have in reserves.
Stop working with the kids at Bel Air.
We got to have the PIDs too, because even if it's not, most of those are not part of the actual escrow payment, it's still a housing expense. So you need to get the dollar amount. Get the annual so we can turn it into a monthly. Yeah. If you guys are looking at a property, and we talked about this last week, if you guys are looking at a property, say it's a property in Ivanhoe, and you know that it's a siding house, we're not going to know that, but it does make a huge difference on the insurance premium because already you're in Ivanhoe where there's not a city fire department. So insurance is high. And if you have something that typically burns faster, then the insurance is going to be more. And so if we're fighting debt to income, we need to know what type of property you're looking at so we can accurately estimate what the insurance is going to be. If they're working with an online lender or someone who's doesn't even know where Ivanhoe is, their assumption is it's this cute little neighborhood and around McKinney where houses all look alike and it's brick and there's a fire department and a fire hydrant just 2 doors down. And so they'll estimate insurance maybe on a $450,000 house at $2,400 a month. When you and I know if it's a $450,000 house in Ivanhoe, that insurance is probably going to be $6,000 for the year. Especially if it's a frame house and got barns and stuff. So all of that stuff matters. So I just can't stress the importance of communicating with whoever it is that you're working with so that you have accurate information so you know the deal is going to click and fund. Absolutely. I did a video yesterday and I was just as a first-time home buyer. If you're not working with a realtor who knows how to negotiate for a first-time home buyer, you're going to miss the deals all day long. Because you guys know how to make the deal work and you know how to negotiate the contract as a first-time home buyer. It's different. If you have to have concessions and that's the only way they can buy, you guys got to set the deal up right in the first place for the first part of the negotiation. The whole deal is going to fall through. Yeah. So I think, yeah, knowing your audience and making sure that you stay in your lane and what you do well is really important. All right.
You're on camera.
Ben, I hope you get to go do something fun.
Did you say something to me?
I said, I hope you get to go do something fun for the rest of the day since you got these 2 hours of CE credit done.
Well, I'm fixing to be in the car headed back to Sherman. We're in Austin, of course.
Yeah, and I could see that.
But thank you for that. Hope you do too.
I find fun everywhere I go. Sometimes I find trouble at the same time, but that's all right too.
I'm going to be closing this and hooking it to my phone and getting in the car in a minute because we're running
Hey,
late.
we're-
But
we're-
I'll still hear everything.
We're done. I mean, you can do it just to challenge yourself from a technology standpoint if you want to, but we're done.
I'm practicing my technology.
I know, you're doing so good.
No, I'm not, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks for the class.
You're welcome.
But I'm not out yet.
That's all right. Okay. Anybody else have any questions, scenarios? Y'all all good?
I do have 2 questions.
Okay,
and
good.
I'm related to the class.
No, that's
For
okay.
realtors here, it's helpful. Is everybody finding that when you're selling something with on-site sewer system,
Mhm.
and the house has been vacant for a few years, the sewer system was pumped in 2019, no one's lived there. Are they having to pump that sewer system again, even though no one's lived there?
So Beverly's question is, if you have on-site sewer and it was pumped in 2019, the house has been vacant, hasn't been used, have you guys been asked to repump a tank that shouldn't have anything in it to repump?
I mean, other than the occasional person checking on the house that might use the bathroom.
I,
once every month
if
or
you're
something.
being asked to repump, I would ask why it's, if they mean repump or if they just want to know that the system is functioning. I would be asking the why, because there may be a better way of verifying that the system is functioning in a safe and sanitary manner in a different, in a better way.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for saying something. And then my second question is, does anybody know anything about this title lock business that people are trying to sell online or sell?
Title lock.
Title lock.
I know what you're,
LOCK.
okay.
And you see the advertisements.
Yes.
and I've had people call me and say, should we buy this? Or is this something that's really?
That is really
happening, or-
scary what's happening. Oh my gosh, Brandy, it's really scary. Let me see. So Beverly's question is whether or not you guys have done any research and know any details about the title lock insurance that is being sold. You're hearing about it on social and on TV and just, I mean, that's a big deal now. Kind of like locking your credit so that people can't commit fraud, trying to tighten that up. The reason that that is a big deal is because people really truly are stealing people's titles. It's electronic. It's online. No, to homes. They're going in and refiling title work, public records, and people don't notice it until they go to sell the house and find out that someone has stolen the title to their home. It's fraud, but it's hard to track, and it's happening.
What do they do? What do they do when they find out, oh, fuck, someone just stole my title?
There's been some cases where they have, there was some, it hadn't been recovered. And in one scenario, it's a real deal.
There is an attorney that was writing like Sherman that was taking out titles on people's houses for short amounts of money over the years, so it's trade out more. And I think they have another attorney had to call spouse of the deceased.
Yeah. It's happening. Had you not noticed that, you wouldn't have known until later. So we are having a title class, Beverly, and I think I will, Brandy, will you email me to talk to whoever's going to do that title class? And I think it was Sean, to talk about title theft, because it's a real deal.
Sean at Red River.
Uh-huh.
So is there a reporting place for title theft? Is there?
Not at this point.
No.
It's a pretty new, it's a pretty new, is anybody on the Zoom call familiar? Have some resources to protect people, or some scenarios that we can learn from? Okay, well, I'll do some research and we'll cover that in the title class, because it really is a real deal.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, what you got, Danny?
Could I plug tomorrow?
Yeah.
I
What's
did.
tomorrow? Oh, yes, I wish you would. Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle is putting on a class at our Better Homes and Gardens real estate offices in Sherman, and it's not just for Better Homes and Gardens realtors. It's for everybody that's interested in self-improvement and how to handle certain things in different situations. And we just want to invite everyone to come over. Don't be reluctant just because you're not a Better Homes and Gardens realtor. We have a nice meeting room there, and come join our mastermind series. And it's at 2620 North Travis Street, Suite 200 in Sherman. And we start at 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, you want to elaborate on the topic?
Yeah, what's been fascinating about this group is it's truly a collaboration. And we really meet at the heart level and talk about real life. And real life is business too. And it's all sometimes gets hard and heavy until you realize you have others there with you from a support standpoint. This year, we are following the book Training Camp, written by John Gordon. If any of you guys have not read any John Gordon books, he's got, 20, 25 different books. They're all easy to read parables with each chapter about a certain point. And in this particular book, The Training Camp, the story is a football player who was just it's not recruited. He just got on the team. He's brand new in pro. Drafted. That's the word. And something happened to him that caused him to really pause and ask a lot of questions within. And one of his coaches became his mentor in really figuring out what the best do best. And it just breaks it down week by week, or each month we cover each chapter. If you haven't been, it's no big deal. You'll pick up from where we are because each chapter is new. And so you won't be lost. This particular week is this month is 3. And so what we're going to cover is being a lifelong learner. And there's questions that you'll be prompted. So it will share a story about what it's like to be hungry and humble. And then there's going to be some questions that you're just going to go within and answer for yourself. You don't have to share with the group, but it's just a really good mindset, professional, personal growth, 1 hour spent together with people in our community. So we have people from all different real estate offices, and there's even some professionals that aren't even in real estate that show up. If you come at 9:30, there'll be breakfast. There's always a sponsor that's providing food, and then we'll get started at 10, and we're always done at exactly 11 o'clock. So it's just.
And tomorrow we've got I think it's Texoma Roofing coming to talk to us about roofs, damages, and we've all been experiencing some of that here recently, and he'll be open for questions. And I really want to stress, you don't have to be with Better Homes Garden, and we're not going to try to recruit you while you're there. So just come and join us.
Training facility. Yep. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. Oh, are you down that rabbit hole now?
Yeah, I will bring you back to one thing I did find out in the little bit of research I've had an opportunity to do. And you can, just like you can freeze your credit, if someone has fraudulently opened accounts, you can freeze a title on your home with the county, so that if in fact someone applies to change that title or whatever that process is called, they will email you and let you know that that process is happening.
It's like having credit lock.
So it's kind of, yeah, and I don't know whether that's what title lock does. I mean, they may be
Lock it in one.
$40 a month to do essentially the same thing you do. And Racing will do it for me. I don't know if the smaller, like Ron County. 2 weeks. Because I think it's just, I believe it's available on the website. I did it about a year ago when I first started thinking about this, and I think it was on the website I did it.
Well, we'll get some research done on that to see what we can do to protect ourselves and advise consumers to do the same thing. Ironically, next week is the title commitment class. So perfect segue. So we'll get some answers for you on the title class. The other thing that we're going to cover that I think is extremely important right now, speaking of roofs, solar panels. We have people coming in right now with hail damage, solar panels on their roof, their insurance company did not know about. And now they got a claim. And they can't get the roof repairs done until the solar company comes and removes the solar panels. And then they got to be reinstalled. So this conversation is totally different than it was 6 months ago because of the circumstances that have taken place. So even if you've been through that solar panel class, every time you leave the class, people learn something. And there have been times, Maureen Stevenson will tell you, it saved a $40,000 discrepancy on a closing coming to the solar panel class 4 days before a closing because of the information that she didn't know that we'll cover on that solar panel class. Same thing with title commitment. There's a lot of things that if you are not aware, then you will miss the, you'll miss some things on title commitment that you should have paid attention to 3 weeks before the closing. But if you don't know what you don't know, so come to class. And then the last thing that I have that I want to make sure you guys have on your calendar that you're not going to want to miss, we all got to get on videos. We have to do it. People expect it from us. So if you still are not sure what to talk about, we're going to do 7 videos you should be making right now with 7 strategies to get those videos in front of people. Kyle Draper.